All right, open your Bibles to Matthew chapter 5. We are continuing with our theme, the blessed life. The blessed life. And last week we looked at verses 11 and 12, if you remember, where Jesus said, "Blessed are you when people insult you, persecute you, and falsely say all kinds of evil against you because of me. Rejoice and be glad, because great is your reward in heaven, for in the same way they persecuted the prophets who were before you." Blessed are you when you are falsely accused because of Jesus Christ. Blessed are you when you are insulted because of Jesus Christ. Sometimes people look at that as not a blessing, but Jesus said, you are blessed if you are going through that. All right? So if you want to be blessed, just let us know. We'll persecute you. No. Remember, it's a persecution and insult because of Jesus Christ. It's not just any persecution or insult. It's because of your faith in Jesus Christ. Now, that is what we call the Beatitudes. Okay? Verses 3 to 12. Now, the following verse is what we're going to look at. But I would still like to put this under the category of being blessed. The being blessed. Because the blessing that Jesus Christ is talking to us about, the first 3 to 12 verses of this book, is telling us about all the things that sometimes don't look right? It's like, yeah, is that really a blessing? When you mourn, you are blessed. When you're persecuted, you're blessed. When you're insulted, you're blessed. Like, wait a minute, how is that? Well, we call that the paradox of the Christian life. I know we don't use the word paradox many times, but the paradox is something that has a meaning to something that doesn't look right or sound right. But call it the paradox. Like, for example, part of the paradox of the Christian life is if you want to have, give. If you want to live, die. Remember, Jesus said that. If you want to lose your life, then find it. But if you want to find your life, you lose it. That means we must be willing to give up before we receive from God. A lot of times we're not willing to do that. But such is the paradox, we call it, of the Christian life. And Matthew chapter 5, verses 3 to 12 is actually paradoxical. Okay, that is a word. Paradox. It's a paradox. It's paradox. Many of these things that Jesus said. You are blessed if you are poor in spirit. Remember that? You are blessed if you mourn. You are blessed if you are meek. You are blessed if you hunger and thirst for righteousness. You are blessed if you are merciful. You are blessed if you have pure heart. You are blessed if you're a peacemaker. You are blessed if you're insulted. You are blessed if you're persecuted. Blessings are given by God even in areas where we do not expect it. Such is the paradox of the Christian. Now, all these things that Jesus talked about, then he followed it up with verse 13. This is still, I believe, part of being a blessing. If you have all these blessings that God has given to you, if you are this person, what he's talking about in verses 3 to 12, then directly Jesus said, if you are that blessed person, ask the person sitting next to you, are you that person? Are you that person in verses 3 to 12? Okay, did you say yes? Okay, well, good. Say good. Well, listen to this now. Come on, son. You listen to this now. Because if you are that person, this is what Jesus says. If you are the person in verses 3 to 12, then Jesus said, then you are the salt of the earth. That's additional blessing. If you are that person in verses 3 to 12, Jesus now says, you are the salt of the earth. Now ask the person sitting next to you, are you salty enough? Are you salty enough? Huh? You are the salt of the earth. See, Jesus is saying if you belong to Him, because that's what the first 3 to 12 verses talks about. If you belong to Christ, if you have all these characteristics, or if you are a part of His kingdom, because remember it says, one of the things it says is, if you are merciful, the kingdom of heaven belongs to you, or you belong to the kingdom of heaven. So He's speaking about, like we said, kingdom lifestyle. If you are in this kingdom, you are part of Christ's kingdom. And if you are part of Christ's kingdom, you are blessed. Okay? We are blessed if we are part of God's kingdom. Now, additional blessing is this. If you are a part of the kingdom of God, you are the salt of the earth. You are the salt of the earth. And then he continues. But if the salt loses its saltiness, how can it be made salty again? It is no longer good for anything except to be thrown out and trampled underfoot. Now, before I explain to you what that means, losing saltiness, let us first look at what Jesus said. That you are the salt of the earth. Turn to your neighbor and say that to that person. You are the salt. All right, you are the salt of the earth. Well, what is a salt anyway? Well, a salt, actually, one of the terms used to describe a salt is that it is a catalyst. What is a catalyst? Well, a catalyst, when it comes to chemical, is some kind of a chemical that when mixed with other chemicals, okay, it starts some kind of a reaction or some kind of an action within that chemical that this salt or this catalyst is combined to, okay, or mixed with. And here's the kicker. This catalyst chemical, okay, is not affected by the other chemicals or other substance into which this catalyst chemical is mixed with. That's what a catalyst is. You mix it with other things, and it doesn't get affected by the other things. It only affects the other substance. That's what a salt is. That's what a salt is. You add it to anything, and it will make other things salty. Isn't that true? Yeah, that's what a salt is. That's what a catalyst is. So, when Jesus said that you as a Christian, you are a salt, He's saying, hey, you know what? You have within you the ability to make a difference where you are. You are a catalyst because you are a salt. If I am a catalyst and I am a salt, then I can make a difference where I am. Can you say that to the person sitting next to you? You can make a difference. You can make a difference where you are. And here's another thing. Let's all read letter C. Remember, you just told the person sitting next to you, you can make a difference. And then he said, and then saying, get this now. Do not be influenced by your environment. Ooh. Because if you're the one being influenced by your environment, then you're not a catalyst. There was a time in the Philippines when apples were so expensive. Just expensive. Only the rich eat apples and grapes. Yeah, you just can't buy it if you're just an ordinary person. I remember my mom, before Christmas, she would try to buy grapes just so us, her children, can have a taste of it. And then she will just ration it. Each one will get like 3 grapes. And so when I first came to the U.S., I was so excited. everywhere I went, said, "Oh, you want to go to dinner with us?" Yeah, and there's always grapes. And I was like, going to town with it. Grapes. I haven't had grapes. So one time we went to this a lady's house, and sure enough, there were grapes and everything. And so I just got some of these. I thought it was black grapes, so I got some of them. Oh my gosh, this tastes awful. So I went to Roselle and said, "Roselle, I think this grape is bad." And she said, "Oh, those are olives." Black olives. But anyway. But there was time, grapes and apples you just can't. And so the missionaries who came to the Philippines, because they cannot easily buy apples, they found a solution to it, because there is one kind of it's actually some kind of a vegetable. We call it sayote. I don't know if you've heard of that word. You can actually look at Asian stores and you will find this, sayote. Sayote takes on whatever taste you put to it. So if you have one apple, if you have one apple and you want to make an apple pie and you only have one apple, you buy sayote. And you know what? The sayote will taste like apple. And so they make apple pies with half of an apple and the rest sayote. And when you eat it, you won't even know it, especially if you haven't had a lot of apples like I did. You wouldn't even know it. Why? Because the sayote just take on the taste of the apple. You wouldn't even know that it was a sayote. It loses its potency because it never had any, and just take on the taste of another. Don't be a sayote. Be a catalyst. Make a difference and influence without being influenced. That's what a salt is. And that's what we are. That's what we are. Another characteristic of a salt is not just it influences, the ability to influence and not be influenced, but that the salt preserves. We all know this, right? Back in the olden times, they didn't have refrigerators or anything, but they used salt a lot. Why? To preserve meat. To preserve meat. As the salt, if that is one of the characteristics or the ability of the salt, that's what we are. To preserve what it is that is good. That is good. You know what? If not for the godly people here on earth, this earth would have gone really, really even bad than it is right now. Do you realize that? It could have been worse than what it is right now, if not for those who are willing to stand up for what is good and what is right. You remember the saying, for evil to prosper, it requires that good people do not do anything. Now we're talking serious now, right? But that's what a salt is. It preserves, it influences, and it's not influence. That's what kingdom people are. And that is what we are. But then Jesus said, but if a salt loses its saltiness, you're probably asking, can a salt really lose its saltiness? Well, we have to understand where Jesus was coming from when he referred to the salt that they were using back then. See, the salt that they were using back then, it's not like the salt that we use now. Our salt now is actually taken from the ocean. We get all the salt we take the water and use desalinization or something, just separate the salt from the water, and that's how we get our salt now. So it's like, even if you get a solid salt, block of salt, it is pure salt. But during the time of Jesus, when he's speaking of the salt, these are salt that are combined with a lot of impurities, because they did not really have the ability to take the salt out of the salty water back then. But they would go to like mountains that are close to the ocean, and they will find blocks of actually salty things. And that's what they use. But it's pure of impurities. Okay? It's mixed with a lot of impurities. And so it's not a solid, pure sodium as we have it now. It's combined with a lot of impurities. And that is why, even if you find a heap of salt, or even get a handful of salt, it's really not all salt as in its pureness. It's combined or mixed with many earthy, impure things that are not really salt. And that is why during those times they can actually say that a salt can lose its saltiness. Like, for example, if you leave a pile of salt outside, you might still see the pile, but then when you taste it, it's not salty anymore. Why? You know why? Because all the pure salt has melted away. But you can still see the pile. Why? Because of the impure, earthy things that it's mixed with. And that is what Jesus is talking about here. That's why he can say that a salt can lose its saltiness. He's not referring to the sodium itself. He's referring to that pile of salt called salt, but the salt is gone. What's only left is the impure, earthy substance combined with it. Unless we understand it that way, we will say, wait a minute, salt do not lose its saltiness. The only way a salt can lose its saltiness is if it has totally melted away. If it's totally melted away, it has given away all its saltiness. Now here, Jesus is saying that as individuals, as Christians, as followers of Jesus Christ, okay, if we will look at it from the standpoint of where Jesus is speaking from, I believe he's talking about a decision that every Christian who is a salt has to make. We are free will beings. And so therefore, you can choose to not make a difference. That means you can choose to not allow your salt to influence others. If that is the case, you can lose your savor. You can lose your savor. Wait a minute, I'm a salt. How could I lose my savor? Well, I believe it's because of the element of the free will in us. That even though you are salt and that God has given you the ability to influence, but if you are not going to use it, or if you make a decision to give up your saltiness, saying, no, I'm not going to follow Christ, that's giving up your saltiness. And so Jesus says, don't lose your savor. Tell the person sitting next to you, stay salty. Stay salty. But the question is, do the people around you even know that you're a salt? Because if not, then you might be losing your saltiness. Do not lose your savor. Because if you do, Jesus says, you can become useless for the kingdom. Because when a salt loses its saltiness, it becomes good for nothing except to be thrown out into the streets and be trampled by feet. There's a decision we have to make. As a salt, am I going to be useful in the kingdom or not? And we must choose to say, I will be. That's the element of the free will there. We can choose or not choose to be useful in the kingdom. And the way to be useful in the kingdom is allowing our King to use us to influence the world where we are at. Remember, for evil to prosper, it requires for good people to do nothing. We are the salt of the earth.